Welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast. I'm Michael Branson Smith here with a very happy on Father's Day Jim Groom. I know it's going to be a few days later when you hear this, but we are two men with babies and probably much better dads, hopefully, I hope, than a man who thinks of his entire family as useless. We're not useless, Jim Groom.
What's his name? What Heslop? He's Bill Heslop.
Bill Heslop. Bill the Battler.
We got to talk about that last name. Yeah. But yeah, it's great to be here, MBS, on Father's Day. In fact, the question is, and people have asked me, is there Father's Day in Italy?
Right. I was just going to remind you of that.
Yes. Actually, there is Father's Day in Italy, but it comes in like April or some other month. And my family half-heartedly engages that. And then I remind them on a day like today that, you know, it's Father's Day in America. Like, there is a place that celebrates people like me, but they ignore me.
People like you. Well, you know, you are contributing. You know, you've helped a few people make their way out of the immigration hell as they made their way into Italy or out of Italy, I bet, right? So, you know, you deserve a few free meal, you know, from those that have been a big part of your life and all those you've affected with your ideas on educational technology. They're still coming back to you, aren't they, Jim?
Absolutely. Yes. Come on, motherfuckers. Here I am.
So
give me that.
we're hiding the fact that we are doing episode 69, and this is Muriel's wedding, and this is going to be the beginning of, we don't know how long, foray into international's 90s indie films, which was, we did this phenomena for some American films earlier, which was a lot of fun. And I'm totally blanking out. What were the top films for that? I can't.
We did Kids.
Oh,
we did
right.
The Ice Storm. Uh-huh. We did Welcome to the Dollhouse. Uh-huh. And we did a fourth one, but I'm forgetting what.
Right. And so right now the list of films is at 6. It might go to 7. We'll see. I've tried. There was one film I couldn't even find to download. It was on YouTube and it was like a really crappy copy. So we'll see. I mean, but there's a lot of movies that kind of, you know, fit international because we're a bunch of stupid Americans. We're like, everything else is international. But
we just don't do Canadian films.
Well, that's Double Happiness, actually. That was the one I couldn't find, which is a Chinese.
There's
Canadian
actually
film.
A lot of great Canadian films. Adam Egoyan really gets his start in the 90s, and I love his stuff. But more to the point, you and I both kind of had a similar experience, it sounds, in the 90s, where we spent a lot of time around our university days or in the movie theaters. I was in Los Angeles. You were in Boston.
Yeah, I was not in university at the time.
Movies.
I was technically, you're right. I was in university, but I almost more relate my time. I was getting my MFA in film, but not film, in just applied arts, which I tried to turn into film degree, which I've talked about in the past. But I was more moving for Gentle Giant, moving and storage than anything. And we went to movies to hide out from the next job as much as we possibly could. If it was the middle of a day in the summer and we were fucking hot and tired and having run around with book boxes for 3 straight hours. And yeah, the 90s, it's so funny because we've done like the 80s was our refuge of our youth. I think the 90s movies were a refuge of our like burgeoning, like discovering adulthood, right? We're trying to figure out how to, the quote I think I've already mentioned is like, where are all the grown-ups? Like, you know, this time of when you're trying to figure out how to separate yourself from your parents. And this story honestly is a big part of that too. And the arrested development of the family of Heslops.
Yeah, but also I think for me, the 90s was very much like a rediscovery as film as text, right? And like the idea that I was in a situation where the girl I was dating at the time was a film student at UCLA, so all people talked about around me was film. Ooh. And so when you would go to films, like everything was open for discussion. I mean, I really loved it. It's partially why I do this podcast, except in this podcast, I can drop the F-bomb all the time and no one cares.
No, we are not made for kids. We never check that box when I put this up on YouTube. It is yet to be possible. we're both way too loose with the F word. It's
Yes.
fuck. Okay, so so Heslop, you wanted to talk about that name. And one of the things that's so funny is, so I was looking at the credits. So this is like Toni Collette's second film, and I adore Toni Collette as an actor and actress. And she was 20 at the time, and there's some great notes. There was two screenings of the 25th anniversary of this film, and I think that what was so fun to find out about was how she, really was in the midst of the 90s Gen X moment, and she said she was delivering pizzas, when she had done one movie when she was 17. Interestingly enough, with Danielle Wiley, and those two have been close friends ever since for a very long time. And she hears from her agent a year before Muriel's wedding is trying to get made. It isn't financed yet, and PJ Hogan talks about how basically Jane Campion rescued the project for him. Jane Campion had just been successful with the piano. They had gone to film school together, and so she vouches for him, which gets the film funding at the time.
Another indie 90s classic.
Yeah, exactly. And what's so fun is, like, in these interviews, they're talking a lot about Collette and Wiley are on stage, and they're doing a screening for the 25th anniversary at the Australian Film Forum, for the Australian Film Forum or something, but it's in New York. And then there's the Australian Screen Forum, not Film Forum, whatever. And they do another one for the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences probably days later. And they talked about how they both had to gain weight for the movie, and like when they got the phone calls from their agents, and they're like together because they're good friends, and they immediately go and start eating because Collette had to gain 40 pounds. She gained 40 pounds for the role, which is crazy to think about. And
it's remarkable when you
Yeah.
see her as a character and how much that plays into her character.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a lot about that. There's much to talk about with her.
Well, we could talk about it first because it's very much, I didn't know this, it's inspired by PJ Hogan's sister's tumultuous relationship with her own father. And PJ Hogan came from a family of 7 kids, and he and her sister were the oldest, and she actually did steal money from her dad and disappear, and calls up, and PJ Hogan in this Guardian article tells the story about how 6 months later she contacted him, and she was worried that he would be mad, and he's like, no, I get it, you had to get away. Like, it really speaks to how, and he literally PJ Hogan talks about how the language of uselessness was the language of his actual father. So yikes, poor PJ Hogan.
But and those scenes, though, when the father starts in on them, are some of my favorite. But I mean, there is,
it's a good part of the comedy. Stuff. Yeah, a bunch of no hopas. I'm gonna be miserable trying to do an Australian accent. I'm not even gonna try. And there's a great story, but I'm gonna hold this for towards the end of the film because I think it's a great story to connect to the ending of the film, and in the kind of one of the things that we're going to be talking about is this idea of found family versus the family you're stuck with. And that's something we visited in our our first
The
film,
Outsiders.
The Outsiders. It was one of the first things we talked about, is how finding an identity among people other than your family, because your family is so miserable to you. And that's a big theme of this film for sure.
And I'll make one production point before I get it, and it's kind of more general, is, I went into this film having no idea what to expect. And being the guy that I am, I saw the title. I was like, I don't want to go see Muriel's Wedding. And, I think there was like, oh, wait, it's, you got to see it. It's really funny, whatever. I go into this movie and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, it was almost like seeing Almodovar's Pepe, Lucy, and Bond for the first time. Like, it was so outlandish and camp, and the characters were so exaggerated. And I had already seen Strictly Ballroom, which is one of the reasons I saw it, and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. And it actually, there was almost a lattice. And another one that doesn't get mentioned here is Romper Stomper. And over
Yep.
in New Zealand, there's
Hmm.
um, Heavenly Creatures with Kate Winslet, who starts her career by Peter Jackson. And you have this kind of like constellation of films coming out of Australia and New Zealand, and they're so over the top and they're
Yeah.
so compelling in that. And it really is kind of a loose second new wave coming out of Australia and New Zealand. That's very kind of important for film that comes after it in the 2000s, 2010, so on. I mean, we kind of get Lord of the Rings out of it and many others. And so it's interesting because going into it, I've never really seen this kind of comedy with this kind of accent and this kind of like people making fun of themselves in such a wonderful way. Like, I loved the Australian humor and
Yeah.
I loved what they were doing here. I just thought this was absolutely gorgeous. So for me, it was very much like a holy shit, there's a whole different kind of film that's, much in many ways because it was new, was much more compelling for me at the time.
And I think that's gonna be something that happens a lot as we visit some of these movies, right? Like, because you know, being Americans, who we're not an international kind of country for the most part, and you're not exposed to a lot outside of the culture that was massive and had influence around the world, especially in the 70s and 80s. And it's to this day one of my favorite things is when, and it doesn't have to be an international film that does this, is like, give me a glimpse into a world I don't know. And it's an authentic world. It's a world where the characters feel very lived in. And obviously that has something to do with it's semi-autobiographical for PJ Hogan. So that makes a certain amount of sense, and it's his first feature film. And those are those kind of movies that, like, you don't know what's gonna. And we before this, we were talking about how much Jim Groom hates Kevin Smith, and 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 Clerks is a version of that too. Like, it wasn't interesting to Jim at all, but it is a
Not at all.
space that existed and it is very unique, in a certain sense, and we're getting access to that world in a way that feels in. Let's stick to Muriel's wedding, where it's actually very, very, very compelling because I mean, Little Ones. One of my favorite early ones was the idea of a senior store detective, like, which is a joke, but it must say something about policing in the Australian state that we don't understand. The notion of that there's someone that's so committed to going after shoplifters, right, and that is a phenomena that they would literally have someone that has that role within the private sector that then connects to the police state of
But
of the town.
But think about it like this too. I mean, it's not like we hadn't seen Australian movies in America. I think we had. One of the most popular is Mad Max
Right, right,
and
right, right.
Road Warrior. So,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
our idea of Australia was this post-apocalyptic wasteland, or it was like, if you think about Nicholas Rogue's Walkabout and some,
yeah,
like, it was this
yeah.
kind of,
Oh yeah, I love that
very
movie.
mythic. But here we're getting a suburban vision of
Right.
Australia that's so different. And like
Yeah.
you said, the characters, it's a great word, are lived in. And
Uh-huh.
we just have this completely new world of Australia where it's
Uh-huh.
not fucking Mel Gibson on top of an oil tanker trying to kill a punk rocker, right? It's a
Yeah,
completely different
yeah, yeah,
world.
yeah.
And I really enjoyed it because,
No.
I loved the Australian first wave and everything, not everything that came out of it, but a lot of what I saw, was able to see through the VHS store. But this is just a completely new world, a breath of fresh air, if you will, of Australian vision and identity.
Yeah. So let's start with that world, which is the Heslop household, which the introduction to that. It's so there's so rich, so much richness, and there's so many kids. It's to the point where like the Wikipedia article doesn't even bother to remember two of the kids, nor does the IMDb for the most part. And you're like, wait, how many kids are there? There's one, two, there's five kids there, but the two middle kids are completely ignored, or actually the youngest and the two youngest kids are ignored. And we have dad Bill the Battler, who's on the fun deal making, and he's yelling at his youngest daughter who's interrupting him, Penelope, who's like doing aerobics, and she's like bopping around the house because she's still young and not affected by the moroseness of the household. And she's like, he's like yelling at Penelope, and also tell your mother make some tea for me, you know. And she does that, and we see Betty from the jump, the mother, and she's like a statue. And we're going to talk a lot about Betty, and I think she's obviously, for literal reasons of her demise in the film, but she's before that the most tragic character by far. And she's just like stuck in motion. She's waiting. She's like a robot being waiting to be given a command, right, from someone within the family. And it's this commentary on the mother being like kind of just in this stuck in her own shoes in this terrible way.
And you almost have to wake that computer up from
Exactly.
sleep mode.
Yeah. Yes. What was the twice in the restaurant? She's like, yes, yes, no, yes. And oh yes, what? Oh yes. Where is she? Oh yes. That's what happens a couple times. And then we have the three other kids, right? All watching cricket together. And Perry, played so wonderfully by Daniel Wiley, is like this big doofus on the couch. And then even bigger doofus ultimately is Gabby Milgate playing Joni, with smoking cigarettes right in the living room of her home. And those two clearly are past their high school age. And then finally Malcolm, who is an afterthought as an actor and a character. And I think it's him, and I think it's Malcolm. Like, I was like, in the beginning, it's like, wait, is that Bryce? No, wait, Bryce is the one who tries to hook up with Muriel back in Sydney, so it's not him. So I'm trying to figure out who's who at the very end, because they're very much, they're, as actors in the Wikipedia article and in the script, in a lot of ways, they're forgotten as much as they're forgotten as kids. Like, that's kind of the idea too, is like, there's so many kids that they're forgotten. Like, you figure your shit out yourself. I'm not here to help you as a parent anymore, right? And that's kind of introduced. And you must understand. Yeah,
exactly. I completely love this family, because I grew up in a family. I mean, I don't know. Luckily, my mom didn't commit suicide or anything like that. But like, right, I grew up in a highly dysfunctional family when it came to that. Well, you know, my dad was kind of overbearing and an alcoholic, and my mom was actually probably the brains of the operation, pulled things together. But we had kids in and out. You know, we smoked in the house. We basically did exactly like this. So when I saw this family, I loved them, but I also loved how over the top PJ Hogan made them. I mean, that for me is his pushing everything to the limits was the greatest. But in fact, even before the house, you open up with the wedding.
Right. I mean, I'm skipping a scene on purpose here, but yes. I mean,
the wedding is out of control.
Yes, and in the way that Muriel's treated by the what I've nicknamed the Mean Girls, her quote unquote friends, not God. Really. And then the way that they perform nasty things to one another right from the jump, with one of them immediately sleeping with the groom, Nicole.
But even the way they scream as they're trying to get the bouquet, and the way their faces look, like they're almost supposed to be attractive, but they're not, because of the way they distort the face and they do the makeup. And for me, that's the whole movie, is they take something that should be beautiful and they completely make it distorted and ugly. And I love that, because that seems to me the whole camp and the whole kind of like vision of this Australian second new wave that comes through.
Yeah. I mean, the way that Sophie Lee plays Tanya, the queen of the Mean Girls, is
so good.
Her affectations of like the way she pronounces, you know, she makes statements of authority because of her stature as a Mean Girl. It reminds me of the film Heathers in that regard. Like this, there's a hierarchy there's a pecking order within this girl group, and she's the queen of it all, and they're all doting on her, Cheryl and Janine and Nicole, though Nicole, not exactly, as we learn that she immediately sleeps with her husband while he's still a groom at the wedding, which is nuts. So yeah, I mean, and the idea of the wedding is going to be important, because technically the name of the film is Muriel's Wedding, and a big part of it is this imagining. I mean, we're not done with the Heslop family, but we were also going to be visiting this idea of there's two forms of escape that Muriel is identifying with. One, the early one that she fantasizes about is this idea of being a bride, right? And this is a way out of her familial context, as she thinks of it as an opportunity to become a new person, no longer be her. This idea, one of the early scenes where the mean girls break up with her at this kind of restaurant called the Breakers, and they're just like, you never listened about like how you dress and your hair, you're too fat. They're so fucking brutal with her, and she literally says, I know I'm not normal, but I'm trying to change, right? And this is this idea, it's she's there's this one of the wonderful things about this movie is a big part of it is connected, and that's where the my life is as good as an ABBA song is. The songs of ABBA, and in particular Dancing Queen, of course, means different things at different points in the story, right? And back in the Heslop household, Muriel, the funny thing is, so at the wedding, Muriel literally gets arrested for having stolen her outfit, right? This leopard pattern dress that she's worn, that her friends, and I keep saying this in quotes, the mean girls, don't even believe that she got as new, but she stole it apparently. And so she's taken home back into this miserable home that's so oppressive, in the context of having being brought back by two local cops, that Bill has to, muster a way of solving this problem to keep his daughter out of jail. And you get a feeling like this isn't the first time either he's done this.
Exactly, and he's quite good at it.
Yes.
He knows everybody's name, and he remembers they were a fullback, and
Yeah.
it's a really great, like, he turns on his charm,
Yep.
he deals with them, they walk away with a case of beer, but then Muriel's left in her room, and then you start to see, I think what you were getting at, all of the ABBA posters. You see a
Mhm.
little shot of River Phoenix, which I think is great,
Yeah.
and it gets to
Yep.
the whole idea of, this kind of pop culture around the world that these folks are kind of enmeshed in, right?
Yeah.
And it is interesting. I'll go back to you, but I love that moment
No,
when
and she
she's
has
back in
literally
the
on
room.
her wall, she has dozens of cutout photos from magazines of brides as well,
Yeah.
right? And she puts in her cassette and listens to Dancing Queen. And this is the kind of, I would call it the Dancing Queen that plays in her head, right? This is the version of the song where she uses it as a way to, like, check out, if you will, in her fantasy. But I think it's important, we should continue on with Bill, because we're going to get to the fantasy of the wedding, because it's important to talk about, like, this is one of the ways that Muriel becomes Mariel initially.
Mario.
But Bill Heslop, we should talk more about, like, because you're right, he is a mover and a shaker to a certain extent, but his hustling is hustle. This is based on PJ Hogan's. He described in that article, his father was a hustler. He was like he calls him a Trump, just a year ago in this Guardian. And he was able to make things happen through manipulation, through lies, through bribes and all this stuff. And Bill the Battler is that. So he's adored by a type in the community.
Yeah.
He gets shit done, but it's not ethical. And at the same time, at Charlie Chan's restaurant, right? This early scene where he takes his family out to dinner to be a performance, and this is a big part of the purpose of family to Bill, is to act as a performance in service to his idea of himself and what he's trying to accomplish as the elder statesman, the politician who makes things happen, right?
This is the best scene. I mean, it's probably my favorite scene in the movie is when he continues to go on and berate each and every one of his kids.
Yeah.
It starts out as a business deal. He's working with these two Chinese guys. He's got the translator. He's trying to say how big a deal he is. He's like, I'll connect you with him. He might need a restaurant, so keep the food coming. But it quickly goes from business to him telling these two Chinese guys what a bunch of losers everybody in his family is. It's hysterical.
Yeah. And he tells Muriel, he tells the story of Muriel going to secretarial school and how she couldn't even type. And she's like, but poor Muriel's like, but then how did I get my certificate? And he's like, I paid for it, And then he goes on to say like Perry is just as useless, and then he wraps it up like he kind of, it's like basically
It's
he
so
targets
good.
Muriel, then he targets Perry, and then the three are just like they're like collateral damage to the remainder of it. Poor like Joni and
And
Penelope.
then Joni, he has stand up and show the picture of him when
On
he was
his,
running for what, I don't know if it was state or council,
it was
whatever it
state,
was,
some
some
sort of state.
elected
Yeah,
official, right?
yeah,
And he stands up and shows it. And then she's like, got the shirt on, which is
yeah,
just brilliant.
yeah.
But then he talks about how he didn't really want it and he's kind of glad he lost, although he only lost by a couple of votes. And
Yeah.
you get a sense that he's a bit of a wash up.
He's a total wash up, and you know he's in the city council technically, so he has a job, and you know he's a quote unquote almost as the he almost makes it, and he you know he just is endlessly bragging, and he has people, he has his minions which come up again. Like there's a
Yeah.
similar dinner later in the film in Sydney where he's you know under investigation at the time, and he's not with his family anymore. He's surrounded by his like legal team that's trying to get him out of this situation. So he's a person who has his accolades, and in that dinner later on too, it's great because a kid who's like 10 walks up for his for an autograph from Bill the Battler, which is, so he's a bit of a cult hero at the to the local man, if you will.
And he also like uses the press to like he's
Yeah,
not stupid. There is a bit of that Trump element to it.
yeah,
Like I do agree with that. I mean, he understands how press works and your name in the press is as good as anything. Good or bad, you want your name you want to be talked about. And he really does that even to the point of, you know, really macabre circumstances. But another thing that happens at that dinner, that, you know, dinner, lunch, or whatever is I love, is it's the first time where it's like, what a coincidence.
oh yeah.
It's Deirdre.
Deirdre
So basically,
Chambers.
yes, there it is. So basically, Bill Heslop is not only a terrible father and unsupportive of his children
Yep.
and a complete asshole, pretty much, and as we said, probably an embezzler, and he's taking bribes and all those things. He's also cheating on his wife in front of his whole family, and
Right.
his mistress shows up at every occasion, and
Yeah.
they always say, "What a coincidence! It's Deirdre Chambers." It's such
There's
a great.
literally three dinners in which this happens again and again. She shows up, you know.
It's brilliant.
And so this is the framework for the family that Muriel is like trying to leave. And so her first pathway, the one that she thinks she has to find, involves actually stealing the fortune, the remain, whatever it is, whether it's stolen as well. She takes the family money by using, you know, the excuse of a blank check that Betty, the mother, is supposed to write on behalf of Deirdre for hiring Muriel to work for her in cosmetics. And so what does Muriel do? She says, let's make it out to cash.
Very smart.
And she uses this. She does nothing for Deirdre at all. Deirdre Chambers, thank God, because she doesn't deserve it. And she instead travels on vacation to Hibiscus Island, where the Mean Girls are, and she's trying to latch on to them and say like, no, I'm like you. And Tanya, who has gone on, instead of her regular honeymoon with Chook, she's going on her honeymoon with her three girlfriends. Because what has Chook done? She discovers the night of their wedding that he couldn't do it. And so she's like, well, I thought I'd do something else for him. And she makes these gestures of a hand job, which is really funny. And then she says, and then I saw lipstick on it. And the best part is the girls are confused initially, and it's so funny. And then I think it's Nicole or one of them points out, it's like she sucked his cock, and then the idea of all of them sucking each other's husbands' cocks becomes a joke later on in the film too, which is so funny and wonderful.
Yeah, again, over the top. Like
Yeah,
that kind of humor,
yeah,
like was kind of refreshing and new. And
yeah,
that Mean Girls crew was a big part of it.
Yeah.
Like they were such great comic relief
Uh-huh.
in this movie. And I just enjoyed like that whole tenor it brought to it. It was just something completely new
Yeah,
for me.
and so Muriel thinks that she, even though they've broken up with her, she can try to saddle up with them, and she follows them to Hibiscus Island, and they see her and they literally scream, and then they really, really berate her and tell her like you have no dignity, and I think Cheryl is the one who says that, and but luckily she finds Rhonda, and Rhonda is so wonderfully played in her first film. Rachel Griffiths, who's I think most people would know from 6 Feet Under. She's the older sister in 6 Feet Under of the Undertaker family. Um,
That's
and
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how I remember her at least mostly.
That's good. I didn't make that connection. That's awesome.
Yeah, and she's so wonderful from the jump because first she's like, "We're both dropouts from high school." Isn't that awesome? And Muriel, but Muriel being Muriel, immediately lies to her and says, like, "Nope, I'm engaged and I'm doing my one last friend fling." And this, of course, Rhonda loves the idea of it's like, "Oh, you're a naughty girl too." And then what's so important though is she confronts Rhonda. They swap stories about the Mean Girls, and because they were menacing to her as well in high school. And the way that Rhonda, it's one of the famous scenes too, is the way that Rhonda reintroduces herself to the Mean Girls. Here, I can
Yeah.
do it. Yeah. And so what's so great is like she goes up to them, and um, Tanya tries to play like she recognizes like aesthetically, wow, Rhonda's beautiful, right? And so she says, "Oh, you can be one of us, not Muriel." And the line she uses is, "You don't have to feel like you're not good enough for us now," like as a way of inviting her to have drinks with
We
them.
can assess that, which is so great.
Yeah. And but she just rams it right back at her and tells her like Nicole is actually slept with, her husband. So she rats out Nicole, and then she tells her to basically fuck off. And she's like, "I'm here with Muriel." And then there's the Waterloo scene with them dancing together,
So
which is
good.
incredible. And
But it happens in parallel to Tanya jumping over the table and choking Nicole and vice versa. It's just so wonderful the way
yeah,
that's got.
I
But
know.
the other thing that the Mean Girls group reminds me of is it reminds me of the crew of Valley Girls in the movie Valley Girl.
Uh-huh.
Right? It's a very interesting dynamic. And sometimes I wonder how much, Australian culture and maybe PJ Hogan is playing against some of those 80 movies and brings that in with a
Yeah.
very Australian frame. But I really love that crew. And you set
Right.
it up beautifully. Like they're such a great, even to the point where they're beating the shit out of each other while it seems like Muriel has found her new life, and in fact we learn pretty soon that that's the case.
Yeah, and it's accidental because she's trying to find that life as like of stature amongst the Mean Girls, which effectively is stature to her father. Like she's like, "I'm going to be a success." Before she, in the moment she's going to steal the money, she tells her mom, like, "I'm going to be a success," and that's in Betty responds, "That's all your dad ever wants," right? And it's not what she wants, and this is part of the sadness of Betty's character. She doesn't have an identity. She doesn't say like, "That's what I want for you, honey." She says, "That's what your dad wants," and we're going to
Yeah.
come back to that quite a bit. But we don't realize it at the moment. But this is the beginning of her found family with Rhonda, because Rhonda, like after they do this Waterloo song, and you see it like for the first time in the film, Tony Collette's character Muriel gets to be someone that has joy when they're dancing together in these outrageous outfits with wigs, and they're in white silk, and it's
Yeah.
first,
And it's beautiful because at
yeah,
first, Tony Collette's character, Muriel, is really hesitant
yep,
and she's kind of doing it. But as the song goes on and as the two Mean Girls are beating the hell out of each other,
yeah,
she gets more and more power and she becomes this like presence.
yeah,
And I think Muriel as a presence in this movie is a part of what they do really well
yeah,
filmically. Like
mhm,
she really comes off the screen
yep,
at several points. And it's almost like that fat girl who's everyone's making fun of, you as an audience member are also watching her burgeon into her own person. It's really powerful.
And not only that, because while the mean girls are fighting, all the beautiful boys that the mean girls are trying to hook up with are actually cheering for both Rhonda and Muriel. Like they're just like, because they're so fun, and in that moment they're mad, right? They're actually the mad
Exactly.
girls.
We're mad, Muriel.
Yeah. And Muriel realizes this, and what's so funny is like there's a couple things that happen before she makes her way to Sydney with Rhonda. She like goes home but immediately leaves, which is it's such a funny scene. She goes home sunburnt, expecting to re-ingratiate her life, even though she's stolen the money. And she sees Joni, and Joni repeats her line, "Muriel, you've been a naughty
No,
girl."
Muriel, you're terrible.
You're
You're
terrible.
terrible,
That's what
Muriel.
it is. Yeah, yeah.
I love that line.
Yeah.
You're terrible,
Yeah,
Muriel.
but it's kind of an affectionate terrible. That's what's so wonderful
Absolutely.
about Joni. It's like
Yeah,
this is a sisterly kind of "you're terrible." Like she's enjoying that she's in trouble, but at the same time, she's like, "You're fucking badass for being the one that keeps getting in trouble, doing the things that I wish I could do," in a sense, right?
totally.
And she comes home and immediately realizes like she's going to be in more miserable trouble, so she takes off. And it's the beginning, and there are these title cards that are used in the film, and there's one with the bouquet that had started the film, and now I think there might have been one for Hibiscus Island, I don't remember, but there's one that's for Sydney, the city of brides. And what's so wonderful about the way that Sydney starts is she has the best 90s job, Muriel.
Oh my God.
She's working in a video store, and she looks so comfortable in her own skin finally, right? Because prior to this, she had been trying to inhabit the world of the mean girls, and she's doing it so poorly. She has all this makeup on all the time. She has these outrageous outfits. Even when she first meets Rhonda, she's wearing this crazy ass red sequined dress, and she's got a full face of makeup that's caked on, and on her red lips. But then in the video store, she looks like she's out of like, a 90s grudge band like concert.
Yeah, she looks so natural,
Yeah.
and like she's dealing with the guy at the counter, and
Bryce.
like
Yeah.
I stopped the video because I was doing something on one of those scenes, and I came back to her and I was like, God, look at Muriel, like she
Yeah.
looks so happy and
Yeah.
fresh and
Yeah.
nice, and unlike those assholes in the movie Clerks. She worked in a real video store, which wasn't a goddamn soap opera. It was just, what do you want for your video? You want thing?
Yeah.
Okay, go.
And
Anyway,
she's
that's another
and
topic.
and she's doing the thing that video store clerks like to do, is they put on whatever they want to watch, right? They're not
And what does she watch?
she's watching Princess Diana's wedding over and over
Which
and
is
over
so
again.
good.
It's so
I
good.
love it.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
her
it's such a great
gigantic
touch.
train. I even remember that as a kid, like that, like the notion of a wedding dress being that long, and the fact that that was a worldwide cultural moment, if you think of it,
Absolutely.
which is so
It
bizarre.
it was. My mom was super into Princess Di.
Yeah, my
Super
mom
into
too.
it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting, and this is from a country that didn't have royalty, but yet the spectacle of all that, and the fact that in a VHS store you would have a VHS tape with that is so great,
Yeah. Yeah, it's wonderful. I think it speaks to like that was like mass culture at a time, because the Princess Diana wedding was an extension of, I think, of like soap opera culture in a lot of ways. And it turned into a
Totally.
real soap opera. It was the fantasy at first, and then it turns into the soap opera. And so you're falling in love with Muriel's situation, and she gets asked out by the guy Bryce. They have a date in the context of Rhonda dancing with these two American sailors, and they're outrageous. And they go back to Muriel and Rhonda's apartment, and Rhonda and the two sailors are having loud sex through the door. You don't see them, of course, and it's just really, really funny because it's just so outrageous, as you said. But then the best scene for outrageousness happens, and it just makes you fall in love with Muriel and her like. It's kind of like, this is something my wife and I say to ourselves, like when you're just in a moment that's so much fun or so much so enjoyable. We would say like, I'm jealous of myself, and that's what Muriel feels like in this moment. She has this boy that likes her for her, and he's trying to make out with her, and then he kind of tries to take off her shirt, and then he kisses her breasts. And what does she do the entire time? She's just laughing outrageously the entire time. She's just like adoring the moment so much, like she can hear her roommate having sex. And then the beanbag they're on explodes and the stuffing goes everywhere, and then the two, there's so much of a ruckus, and the two Navy guys that are naked come out, and that just cracks her up even more. And it's just a glorious, glorious scene of love, of a moment for a girl being a girl and what she thinks is great. And that's what's so
Oh,
cool about it.
and the whole scene, and I agree, it's a great scene. And the whole scene starts with him saying to her, before we get started, I have to tell you something. And you're like, this is the time of AIDS. This is the time, like, when anytime you were having sex, it became a different thing, right? Like, you were afraid. And he's like, I'm a parking inspector. And that was so great. And
Yeah.
she's like, I'm fine with that. But it was that comic timing throughout the movie,
Yeah.
which really made it. And then, because it's funny, because after that scene, like you said, which was raucous and wonderful, it ends with her roommate not being able to stand up
Right.
and actually being paralyzed.
Right.
And then, like, so you immediately go from this free love, grunge 90s to this serious
Yep.
situation that she's in with her newfound kind of life partner. Even if it's just a friend, they really do feel like they're married in a way.
Yeah, and it's great because like this is something that Daniel Wiley brings up with Tony Collette in their interview at the one of the screenings. How like this is a comedy, but has anyone ever seen a sadder, more tragic comedy ever?
Ever.
And
Agree.
this is the beginning of it because Rhonda, we find out, has cancer, and she has a cancer that's a tumor. And it's so funny because they're like, it's like he's describing a tumor on her spine, and they're like, and he's like, oh, we'll just remove it. And then he brings up cancer, and they're like, wait, what? Because they're just kids, right?
Yeah.
These are two people that are probably like 21, 22, 23, and there's no adults to walk them through anything. It's just the two of them and the doctor. And you're very much right. This is the beginning of cementing this family she's building with Rhonda, because not only does Rhonda initially, she has the surgery and she can barely walk, and there's this really kind of tough scene where she's struggling to walk. It's like she's on those handbars, and she's mostly supporting her body with her shoulders. And at a certain point, she can't take it anymore. And the nurse and Muriel's there, get her in a wheelchair, and she's so fucking miserable. And she's like, her misery is so bad. She looks at Muriel and she says, like, why the fuck are you here? Like, why in
Yeah.
the world would you want to stick by this? And this is probably one of the most, besides the ending of the film, the most touching moment of the film, where she says, you know, I used to listen to ABBA all the time and play ABBA all the time, and it was my escape. And she admits to that. And she says, but this is the quote: "My life is as good as an ABBA song. Like my life is Dancing Queen." And she's saying, because of you, what you've shown me is made my life not miserable, finally, for the first time ever. And in this moment, you're also realizing like she's doing that for Rhonda. It's not just the one-way street where Rhonda's this wild girl that sees Muriel for being this wonderful, cool woman that she is, despite not being popular in the traditional way. But now it's Muriel telling Rhonda, you're fucking great no matter what, and I'm here, going to be here for you.
I mean, and for me, that's a really powerful part of this movie, but also of this relationship of, who you are as a kid in your family. And we see
Mhm.
that with Muriel, but then who you can be apart from that. And like I was in, Los Angeles, Long Beach, California. I was going to community college. I met this girl, and like she's the one who went on to UCLA, and I went there too. And like that was a bit of it was a new sense of who I could be and what I was. And it doesn't mean I wouldn't have gone to college or do that, but like a sense of having an identity apart from that in Long Island and the family that I had. And it doesn't
Mm,
mean I didn't love them, and very much they were framed and shaped by that, but also that I was shown that there's other ways of being. There's other possibilities. And that is Muriel in Sydney. And she's basically saying to Rhonda at that point, you showed me what is possible.
right.
Right. And that's like the ultimate thing a partner can do for another,
Right.
is show them who they are outside themselves or outside everything they've known. And it's complete liberation. And it usually happens around this age. So
Yeah.
it's a great coming of age story too.
Yeah. 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 Where, I mean, you could say it's that cliche. It's like friends are the most important thing in the world to you. But in this particular case, it's more than just like, oh, we're going out and hanging out and partying, and it's a very formative time, as you're saying. But at the same time, it's this formative time where she's building an identity outside of her parents, but one in which that means it's one where she actually likes herself because she hasn't had that, because
Yeah.
she's been beaten down and told she's useless. And earlier, back at Hibiscus Island, she's asking Rhonda, like, do you ever think of yourself as nothing or see yourself as useless? And Rhonda catches on immediately that she's talking about not her and like trying to see if she is equally miserable. She's like, no, you're fucking amazing, Muriel. And this is her paying it forward, paying it back to her basically for that
Yeah.
initial uh recognition of her. But the funny thing is, the sad thing is, Dancing Queen is still playing in the background in her mind.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy of it, is like, it isn't just all, funny times, even though she has cancer, just like, I'm going to be there with you. She gets, and it's triggered by, at the hospital she calls home, and she learns that her father's in Sydney and wants to see her. Because I forgot to mention, during the scene in which, she's gonna about to make out with Bryce, on the TV is her dad, who's under
Yeah.
investigation. And
And
he's
is actually making a plea for his daughter to come home.
right. And so she, you know, is willing to go see her father at dinner, and it's a mirror image to the Charlie Chan dinner scene, ultimately, as we've already described. And he's
That's right.
instantly taking her down and saying she's ruined him, and he's talking about how he's going to defend himself and it's not going to be a problem, but at the same time is pushing on her. And who shows up?
Deirdre Chambers. What a
All
coincidence.
in Sydney. But this time is the first time Muriel is going to push back against her father and says, like, basically, did you leave mom for Deirdre? Are you in a relationship with Deirdre? And Deirdre is the one who says yes, right?
Yeah.
She forces the issue for her dad, and she walks out. And we don't know what that means yet, but it's very wounding.
Yeah.
And she goes home and sees Rhonda asleep, curled up and looking, not the Rhonda that we know, that's alive and dancing with men and outrageous, but we see her wheelchair. And what does she do? She turns on Dancing Queen. And so the music in her head returns, and she starts to fantasize about the bride again, the original Escape, I'm going to be the one that was engaged to Tim Sims, who was the lie of the fiance, who's now pursuing her because he was so in love and she broke up with him. And she goes to wedding store after wedding store after wedding store, telling lies about family members in order to let her, try on a gown and get photos for free, Polaroids, of course, which is awesome. And she fills a wedding album of her fantasy.
Yeah. And ultimately, Rhonda finds that. But I have to say, those scenes where she's going to these, and there's a couple of scenes we actually see where she's going to these wedding stores and she's saying, like, yeah, my mother's in a wheelchair or
Yep.
got a tumor. And she uses another one, like, my sister's in a coma. Or like, she uses these crazy excuses,
Yeah.
kind of pulled from her life, but kind of not, where she basically gets the proprietor to kind of not only be kind to her and let her try on the dress, but also take a photo so that she could bring it back home. But that is some of the best acting in the movie.
Yeah.
Toni Collette really like, and she's great. You see it from the beginning. She's striking in what she's doing. But once she starts getting into these wedding dresses and like really pulling these people out, and you kind of feel sad because you're like, here she is, you know, Muriel's on the direction, or Mariel at this point is
Yeah.
on the right direction. And then she falls back into these old habits,
Yeah.
and you're really sad. And you're like, come on, Muriel slash Mariel, like you've got it. You're a badass. Stay in the video store, right?
Yeah.
And you know, you can kind of see, and that's a real part of this story. Like you said, like there's a deep tragicness and realness to this story. It's not all just mean girls and fun. There is a dark sense of like all of our returning to those things that are probably the most unhealthy for us.
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it. I mean, we we have these ideas of who we are becoming in a moment, and but at the same time, you're very vulnerable. Like your identity is very vulnerable, and
Totally.
whenever things aren't staying on track, or you're suddenly, moving furniture for say 2 years instead of pursuing what you think you're supposed to do with your life. But then that's when things happen. And then it's in those contexts I met I got together with my future wife, and you don't know what's going to happen. And that's what is happening with her and Rhonda, but she falls apart. And then we do the most outrageous story. She gets the film compels her to become a version of her fantasy, as she discovers this mail order bride scenario with the South African beautiful swimmer David, who needs to become an Australian citizen so he can compete in the Olympics for Australia, because that's all his parents want for him. And when she meets him, it's just probably one of the funniest scenes in the whole film. And she calls him, it's like, "Are you black?" Because he's trying to escape the civil war that's going on around apartheid in South Africa. And the way that David's character looks back at her is just so wonderful.
And even that, you know, even that arc, that small mini arc of what she's doing and how she realizes is another powerful part. And I think it gets to your point, which you said earlier, is it's a comedy, like, you know, built on top of a tragedy.
Yeah.
So the comedy really works, but the tragedy underneath it doesn't go away. And so as Muriel continues on with this fantasy of the wedding, and this is a wedding that's going to make her dad proud, that's going to make all the mean girls back in Porpoise Spit love her and respect her, right? Because she's done that. The one person it actually alienates is the one person who actually helped her escape, you know, all of that, which is Rhonda. So there's that tragic push and pull between the two. And the other person it ultimately alienates, because the father has essentially come out with Deirdre Chambers, and Deirdre Chambers is now at the wedding with her father, is the mom.
Betty.
The mom becomes a completely like invisible character.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great quote where the mom is basically, you know, Muriel finally, you know, digs up the courage to call home. And she does call home, and she talks with her sister. And then her sister says, "Mom, so you didn't want to talk to mom." And then she says, "Where's dad?" And Muriel's mom says, "Dr. Farrell says he needs a holiday from us." And there's that like sense that the father has been obviously stricken, you know, and all of his problems are a result of his family, rather than vice versa.
Right.
And I think there's that and that's the mother to the very end in many ways, defending the dad.
Yeah.
And the mother is a deeply tragic figure.
Yeah. Yeah. And we should get into that, because, you know, the wedding happens in the most tragic moment of the wedding. Well, there's two. It's both between, as you said, Betty and Rhonda. Rhonda is the first casualty ultimately, because she's like literally sitting in her wheelchair at the side. She's now being pushed around by her mother because Muriel is backing out on her promise that they'll never return to Porpoise Spit. because Muriel's found her escape as a mail order bride to a beautiful Australia, a South African swimmer who's
Yeah.
rich and is going to provide a home for her. And she's one of the things that I always kept thinking about is she's been pursuing this fantasy of a bride, but she's never been pursuing a relationship, right?
Yeah.
And you're right, because Rhonda is the real relationship, and she's pushed her out, and she's like, nope, I know you're, because we've also learned that Rhonda now has to have a second operation and she's never going to walk again. And so she's going to be going back to Porpoise Spit. And this is where I'm going to go back to one of the original notes from PJ Hogan in his when writing about in the 30th anniversary of the film. He tells the story of meeting a gay man in New York who loved Muriel's wedding. And he said people in the community adore this film and they identify with it because at the time of the AIDS crisis, this was the biggest nightmare of a gay man who had escaped, their small-minded communities where they weren't supported because of their gayness, most likely, and not uncommon. And they had found family wherever they found their gay community, but then they could get sick. They could get HIV and then full-blown malaise, and they would be forced to go home and be sick and dying away from their people that had adored them and loved them for who they were. And that's what how they read that film, and how Rhonda is living this in her life, is that she's this person who had escaped and found Muriel, and they were living this wonderful life away from their small-minded communities and didn't see them for who they were. And she's now going to be forced to go back.
Yeah. And I love that reading. I think that reading's absolutely brilliant. And once you said that to me before we started, it's like, absolutely. That's a huge part of the second half of this film is, Rhonda in her wheelchair, surrounded by the mean girls once again, and her mom who's just abusive to her, much
Yeah.
like the dad is abusive to the kids. And, they're back where they started and there's no sense of progress.
Right. And so Muriel, because she's Muriel, and this is living her fantasy, is, beaming during the wedding. And that's the picture behind us. And I'll show it, it's like her very uptight father. But at the same time, we have, oh gosh, my browser is so mad at me. Okay. And then he doesn't make sense of it at all, but she's just living the fantasy of the whole thing. And
good picture too. I like your background picture.
yeah. And so, but the biggest tragedy, we've already talked about Rhonda, but it's Betty. Betty doesn't even get to the wedding until it's almost over. And she sees Bill with Deirdre, and she watches her daughter with this man she's never met, David, the swimmer, walk right by her and not even acknowledge her.
Yeah.
And she's just heartbroken. And then the heartbreak continues because back home, Bill comes, and there's this scene where basically the store cop again comes into play. It's kind of a joke, but poor Betty is shopping, and she's wearing these very uncomfortable shoes, and she picks out some slides and puts them on and forgets to pay for them, and she gets arrested, and Bill is forced to intervene as he did for her daughter in the beginning. And he basically says, I want a divorce. And he blames her, like, because you've already talked about, he never, it's the inverse. It's like the poor family that is, made him miserable, when in fact it's the reverse. He's been making this entire family miserable. And in this moment, he's blaming her, and her, like, reason for that, he lost the state election again, or is like, because of they all tell me it was because of you and what he did. And the worst part is she tries to do, for one last time, kind of parrot, his thinking to the kids. And he tries to blame Perry, because that's the shocking moment. It's like he's yelling at her and walks out, and poor Perry is right there, and we don't even realize it. And he tries to tell Perry, you're so useless, get a job. And he strikes her back, right? And it says, you're the problem. And this leads to the biggest tragedy, where basically Betty commits suicide through taking a bunch of sleeping pills. And this brings...
Yeah. Not your average comedy.
No. And this brings Muriel out of her Muriel trance, because she's forced to go home.
And I think it happens really, I mean, the moment you see it happen in the movie is obviously Muriel goes back home. They have the funeral, and she's sitting in the pew with her dad and Perry. And her dad is talking to Perry, saying, once they announced that the ex governor or prime minister
Yeah.
was in support or sends his condolences to Bill Heslop, he's like, what are they doing? And they were all furiously writing, and she realizes at that point, Muriel does, that she's not that different from her dad,
Yeah.
right? Like she's trying to go for effect and completely ignoring that impact she's having on other people and those people who are closest to her and her love. And I think that was her realization. She gets up, she leaves the church, and she goes, I think almost immediately, although I might be missing a beat, to Rhonda in
No,
her
no, no, no.
home.
No, it's very interesting. She has a moment with David where David becomes a sympathetic person, and they
That's
actually make
right.
out and they sleep together. And she, in PJ Hogan is steering you to, maybe she's going to have her dream, right?
Yep,
She's not only does
exactly.
she have all the life, but she's going to have the man that loves her. But instead, I think this is the final pivotal, moment where she literally says to him, I'm not going to be able to, if I keep lying this much, I'm going to be like my dad basically, and I'm not going to be able to know anymore when I'm doing it. Right. Like you just
Yeah.
don't. And she admits to him, like, and it's a really funny line. It's like, I don't love you. And he's like, I don't love you either, but maybe we could enjoy being around one another.
Exactly. You might be good to have around, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I wouldn't mind having you around. And because he's realizing, like, oh, she's a cool person. And there's some good
no,
affirmation
that's
in
great.
that. But
And you
she does immediately jump afterward to Rhonda.
and you reminded me, she goes to, after that, she doesn't even go to Rhonda, does she? She goes back home and faces off
Oh,
with her
right.
dad.
And no,
And that's
and
where
Deirdre. Yeah, 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 yeah.
and basically Deirdre doesn't really want to be with the dad anymore because it means dealing
Uh-huh.
with the kids. And the dad has to come, and he's like, Muriel, you got to stay home and help me deal with these kids and
Yep.
deal with. And she's like, no, this is your mess.
Yep.
It's time for you to come clean and deal with it. I'll pay you back the money,
Yep.
but like this is not on me. This is on you, and it's time for you to take ownership.
Yeah.
And that's a great like moment. And I have to say, the film is pretty easy on Bill Heslop. Bill
Totally.
Heslop is kind of a complete asshole as we're doing this Father's Day edition, and like forces his wife to commit suicide, like beats the shit out of his kids' egos.
Yep.
Like he is like a bad, bad dad, played brilliantly by, I think it's Bill Hunter,
Yep.
but it's just a brilliant performance. But they let him off pretty easy. Even Muriel is like, yeah, Dad, you're gonna have to deal with this. Bye
Yep.
bye.
Bye. And she's and even Joni is like, it's like, oh, I thought you were gonna stay. She's like, fuck, and it's true because even though, and these are just speeches, and the film like implies through her speech that maybe Bill's going to change because he admits, like, I'm on the dole, right? He's berated Perry and Joni and Muriel for being on the dole, which, if you don't know the dole, that's the euphemism for getting public support for food and for life, from the federal government. And
Welfare.
welfares, thank you. Sorry. That's the synonym, right? and and so he knows but he's still talking shit in that moment, if I recall, at the same
Still is.
time.
Absolutely.
So I'll admit, even though, Muriel's making her speech and saying, like, you got to stop telling everybody they're useless, I worry that he's not going to stop, right? Ultimately.
No. No, I agree with you. But you do finally have Muriel coming back to Rhonda, rescuing her, quote
Yeah,
unquote. I think they rescue each other
absolutely.
from the mean girls and her mom, and they're on their way back to Sydney.
Yeah, and that's the whole point, is like, it's ultimately, despite that she's able to give this speech to her dad, which is really important, the more important thing is she's not staying, and she has someone she can trust and go to figure out life together. And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean they're going to be together forever. I mean, Jesus, we have someone who's had reoccurring cancer, and so that's scary. But
Yeah.
also, you know that she's meant to be in the city. She's meant to be that classic 90s Gen X girl that's like got a
Yeah.
shit job and figuring life out. And thankfully, I believe that she would. Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, a little story for you before we go off this beautiful podcast number 69 is so I'm in 2017, I think. I'm in Australia and I'm hooking up with a friend of mine, Peter Rowan,
Oh,
great
great.
guy I
Yep.
met from DS 106. Shout out to the great Peter Rowan Peter. And
He mows
he's
a
like,
good
hey,
lawn, right?
he mows a good lawn. Anyway, he says to me, you're going to love this museum, the ACMI. And I'm like, ACMI, and it's Melbourne's, it's Australia's film museum. So he
Okay.
takes me to it. You walk in, and there is the Mad Max Interceptor car. It's iconic. I'm like, oh my God, this is so iconic. You walk past that, not but 10, 15 feet, and you have the dress from Muriel's wedding. And I'm
Oh, that's
like, oh
awesome.
my God, like this movie,
Yeah.
maybe not as iconic as Mad
Yeah.
Max, that would be
Of
a
course not,
tall
but
order.
yeah.
But this is that iconic in terms of the Australian 90s kind of revival. And I don't know if it's a revival or renaissance, a new wave. I don't know what you would call it. But Muriel's Wedding, for me, even more so than Strictly Ballroom, which I did love, Muriel's Wedding is at the center of Australian film in the 90s. And just that kind of campy, over the top humor that is undergirded by a really deep, dark kind of sense of the tragedy of life that all of us go through with our families and our relations. And it was amazing how well he could balance these two, PJ Hogan, when he made this film.
Yeah. I mean, thank goodness for people that make those kind of stories that come from somewhere very, very, very personal, but they find ways to place it in a fictional world successfully and do it gracefully. I mean, in back to an early quote, like, because he basically asked his sister permission to make this movie, right? It's like, tell her story. And she's like, you can do it. Just make me the fucking heroine. Like,
It's awesome.
And he does it wonderfully. He doesn't make fun of this fat, awkward girl as most movies would normally do. And that's an important story as of this film's story, is like how the portrait of Muriel as a self-affirming person that is being made fun of has a place to be in life beyond what other people think of her in a negative way. And that's what ultimately is so great about it too.
And not even to say, I mean, I'm sorry because your idea just pushed an idea on me. It's
No,
like,
go for it.
like in the 90s, I mean, part of what this is being experimental and, indie and just cool is you do have a heroine who is not body Hollywood specific, right?
Yeah.
When you see Muriel at first, you're like, what the fuck? Why is she the heroine? But by the end of the film, you fucking love Muriel.
Yeah.
And like you are completely sold on the whole idea. And I think that in and of itself is a testament to what this film could do.
Yeah. Yeah. Super great. All right. Many more, interesting family drama and international films to come. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Big fan.